We're learning more about that deadly strike on an Iranian school that killed at least 168 children and 14 teachers. Two sources briefed on the preliminary findings of an ongoing military investigation tell CNN the U.S. military accidentally hit the school. The sources say the mistake likely occurred because of outdated information about a nearby Iranian naval base. Joining us now, CNN State Department reporter Jennifer Hansler. Jennifer, I want to start with you. What more did this initial investigation find?
Well, Wolf, according to these two sources who were briefed on that preliminary finding of the ongoing investigation, U.S. Central Command had used this outdated intelligence from the Defense Intelligence Agency to compile the strike coordinates for this deadly strike. Now, these strikes happened on February 28th when they were targeting an IRGC base in Minab, Iran. However, back in 2013, the base and the school were all part of one compound, according to satellite images. 3 years later, images showed that a fence had been constructed to separate the school from the base. And fast forward, Wolf, to December 2025, there was imaging of school children, people milling about a courtyard, potentially playing in that courtyard. Now, the Defense Intelligence Agency said that there was an investigation ongoing. They would not comment further than that. U.S. Central Command pointed to that ongoing investigation. But Wolf, all of this supporting the growing evidence that the U.S. was behind that deadly strike on the school that killed some 180 civilians, including those 168 school children. And there are growing questions now as to why that outdated intelligence was used to compile these coordinates. There is a group of Democratic senators who have pressed the Defense Department for answers on this, but this is an incredibly costly error in terms of civilian lives if it does play out in that final investigation that the U.S. was responsible for this, Wolf.
All right, Jennifer Hansler at the State Department, thank you very, very much.
The preliminary findings of the U.S. military's investigation into that strike on a girls' school in Iran, which blames American targeters who sources tell us likely used outdated information about a nearby naval base accidentally hitting the school. You can see on this aerial photo how close the school is to the military facility. 168 children, 14 teachers were killed, according to the Iranian state media. CNN's Kristen Holmes asked the president about it.
A new report says the military investigation has found it was the United States that struck the school.
I don't know about it.
You'll recall he's not always been so reticent.
Mr. President, did the United States bomb a girls' elementary school in southern Iran on the first day of the war and kill 170?
No, in my opinion, and based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Hegseth? It was Iran who did that?
We're certainly investigating.
Still investigating?
But the only side that targets civilians is Iran. We think it was done by Iran. Because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran.
You'll notice the Secretary of Defense, what he calls the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, did not confirm what the president said, that it wasn't the U.S. He just said it's being investigated and that Iran targets civilians. That is the president on March 7th. 2 days later, when it became clear a Tomahawk cruise missile had hit the school, the president claimed that Iran had them as well, which is apparently not true.
What do you make of the fact that it was potentially based on outdated information? Is that normal?
Unfortunately, it has happened before. I was working on the Balkans at CIA when there were parts of our team that provided the information that led to the erroneous strike of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, right? People were just devastated by that, but they were using old maps. But, you know, back then in the 90s, we didn't have Google Earth, we didn't have AI. And so the idea here that we're hearing is that DIA, which would have responsibility for doing this, did not update that target list. They had old information. So you can imagine at the beginning of this war how quickly it went and how that information that we were going to do this came down very, very quickly to the operational level. And we've hit 5,000 targets, I think is the last I've heard, to update the target packages. Some of these packages like where you have the imagery and you determine this is something worth striking, these can be very old and they need to be refreshed. But this school was around for 10 years. So this is a major, major mistake. It should have been caught. It should have been refreshed. And frankly, I hope, and I feel terrible for the people who provided that information, but we need to learn from this and make sure we're using AI and all the tools to prevent this from happening again. But I have to agree with the administration that while this is a huge, horrible tragedy, the United States military and the intelligence community does try very, very hard to prevent it. But mistakes happen and lives are lost.
Andrew, as you look at this, I mean, they've said that it's under investigation. I mean, there are questions of how long that takes to play out. Obviously, it's one thing for them to come out and acknowledge responsibility, but CNN investigations, the New York Times, Reuters, many other outlets have done preliminary findings themselves that can show geolocated images that point to U.S. responsibility.
The evidence is overwhelming. I mean, even at this early stage in the investigation. We can only hope that the investigation will continue to a reasonable and fact-based conclusion, and that it will be shared transparently with the country and the world.
Yeah. Andrew McKay, Beth Sander, great to have both of your expertise here.
That devastating bombing of a girls' school in southern Iran. According to an ongoing military investigation, the U.S. was responsible, and outdated information could be to blame. You're a member of the Intelligence Committee. You're briefed on all of this. What information are you receiving, first of all, about this?
Well, I have very deep concerns about how this site was targeted. Obviously, it was next to naval operations, but even in New York Times reporting this morning, they were able to see the site clearly in publicly available data that shows this was clearly a school. So I have very serious questions that I asked in the Armed Services Committee hearing this morning of our top generals, asking specifically, how was this location targeted? What tools were used? Was AI used? What is the oversight responsibility of commanders to make sure these sites aren't targeted? I want to know what Secretary Hegseth knew about this targeting. He has undermined the resources that we put aside in the armed services to ensure that civilians are not targeted in any military operations. And he has degraded that those sets of personnel and resources. I don't think we've had the oversight and accountability that we are entitled to. We have yet to have an open hearing on the Iran war in the Armed Services Committee. So I have a great deal of questions, and I think Secretary Hegseth should resign because of this failure in being more precise. This operation was on the first day of operations. All sites were selected, pre-targeted by our military with arguably great care and great precision. And so how they missed that this was a girls' school is very concerning to me. If Secretary Hegseth did not cut the funding for this area of review by 90%, if Secretary Hegseth did not continually try to undermine the rules and the procedures that our service members and our generals take, I think he should resign because of this failure.